Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome today to this show on the 4th of January. Well, 4 days, as I mentioned, that soon it will be Christmas. Once the New Year's Eve and New Year's Day is over, we are back into it. Well, right now today we have lots of news to get through, and it's wonderful to have your company. Well, right now Brisbane is sunny today, and it's looking very, very good out there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you were wondering, in the Fahrenheit, it's 82 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. We will look at the Celsius one in a minute as well. Well, right now, moving on, let's take a look at that investigation into that SeaWorld crash. Let's see, what do we know so far?
In less than a minute, a joy flight turned deadly. 4 lives lost and several others injured.
We do know that the helicopter taking off had been airborne for less than 20 seconds.
This is all that was left of the 2 SeaWorld helicopters after they collided yesterday afternoon. One was taking off and the other was making its descent. They were only a few hundred metres in the air when one flipped and hit a sandbar. The second was able to land. Today, wreckage from both was moved from the crash site. Those on board both flights, holidaymakers.
Just shocking, just unbelievable. You just can't believe that it's happened. You know, they've gone for a joy flight and then not come back.
Queenslanders are grieving through yet another tragedy.
The 3 tourists who died were all in the same chopper, a couple from the UK and a Sydney mother. Her 10-year-old son was critically injured, along with another woman and her 9-year-old son who were visiting from Geelong. The pilot, local man Ash Jenkinson, was also killed. In the other chopper, 6 people who weren't seriously hurt. 2 New Zealand couples in their 40s, a 27-year-old West Australian woman and their pilot, who was praised for his quick thinking.
We could have had a far worse situation here, and the fact that that one helicopter has managed to land has been quite remarkable.
Other aviation industry experts say these types of scenic flights demand a lot from those behind the steering controls.
If you're doing a 5-minute or even 10-minute land, get the people off, get the people on and go again, that's a fairly stressful environment.
We'll certainly be looking at multiple lines of inquiry here around the procedures that were in place.
Air safety investigators will now sift through the wreckage, interview witnesses and analyse any footage of the collision. But it could be some months before it's known what caused this tragedy. Talissa Saganto.
High above the Gold Coast, showing off his city to happy tourists. Pilot Ash Jenkinson was living the dream.
A helicopter pilot on the Gold Coast, you don't get much better, that's for sure.
But yesterday afternoon, the unthinkable happened. The SeaWorld helicopter piloted by Mr Jenkinson colliding mid-air with another. He died along with 3 of his passengers. Friends have remembered the pilot as a legend who was integral in helping rescue flood victims in northern New South Wales.
He's just someone you wanted to be around, a big guy with a big heart.
Hundreds grieved on social media, one friend posting, "My heart breaks for Kosha and your little baby boy." Another said, "The world has lost a wonderful man, pilot, friend and father." Floral tributes are growing for all of the victims.
My heart goes out to those people who came here to have a beautiful time on the Gold Coast and have tragically passed away.
People wanting to pay their respects to those who lost their lives are being asked to lay tributes here at the Broadwater Parklands. Fundraising efforts have appeared online for some of the survivors. The Kenyan community in Geelong is rallying around 33-year-old Winnie De Silva and her 9-year-old son Leon. The pair were only reunited last year after Leon was granted an Australian visa.
Winnie just wanted Leon to have fun and just to see Australia. I think it's just a mother wanting to give the world to her child.
A 57-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man from the UK were also killed, as was a Sydney mum whose 10-year-old son remains in a critical condition. The British Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office say they are supporting the family of the UK nationals. Alexandria Utting, ABC.
And such a big tragedy there, ladies and gentlemen, that is unbelievable. And these things happen as experienced pilots as well, but it is just a misjudgment as the timing. And, well, we can't say too much until the investigation has concluded. Well, right now, the other problem that we have is a lot of, deaths that have taken place over these holiday periods. One would be looking at those swimming areas, but today men found dead with 2 others injured by police.
1 man dead and 1 in custody. Police were called to a home in Chewett Hill just north of Perth in the morning.
Grab your ID on you. Can I grab your details, please?
Ambulances turned up soon after.
This is just so out of the normal for this sort of area, because our kids just go down to school right around the corner, ride our bikes, and we're just like, okay, this is full crazy, this is not what we're used to. So yeah, it's just scary.
2 others were also injured in the incident, one a man in his 60s with serious injuries, the other a man in his 40s. They were taken to Royal Perth Hospital.
A 23-year-old man has been taken into custody at the scene and is assisting us with inquiries. The investigation into these circumstances are ongoing. Anyone with information, if they could please contact Crime Stoppers.
These streets have been cordoned off for most of the day, with forensics and homicide squad detectives combing through for details. Police say the alleged perpetrator was staying at a home on Lena Street, where he allegedly killed 1 man and injured another, who both lived with him at that same house. Another person, who the alleged attacker is not believed to have known, was then injured on a neighbouring street. That victim is in a critical condition. Detectives say there's no ongoing threat to the community.
We believe it's fairly confined, and we don't believe the community is at risk at this point.
But officers will be at the scene for at least another 2 days to try to piece together what took place. Kason Ho, ABC News.
Again, all these investigations that will always take time, a lot of time that's needed. Well, right now, the other point that I was trying to make was people, getting caught in the reefs. Like, this is something that many people are not aware of about Australian waters, that if you're swimming in unpatrolled areas, there is a high risk that if you get caught in a reef, you will not survive, or if you are caught and someone else comes in to help you, that person might not survive. Here's that report.
Look, I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. Realistically, this is the first true hot Australian summer we've seen since 2019, since those bushfires. Since then, we had the COVID lockdowns, and then we had the floods and big, heavy rain. And we've just seen a mass inundation of people and visitations coming down to the coastline. And every beach is just overwhelmed and overrun. And it's just so important while we're trying to push this message about swimming at patrolled locations, because every drowning that's occurred has been at an unpatrolled location.
Do you think it is that people have forgotten that key message, the rules around water safety?
Yeah, look, I think, again, it just comes down to people, and we understand this, are trying to find spots that aren't as crowded. But the issue is, if you're trying to find a spot that's uncrowded, essentially it's unpatrolled. And if you don't see any red and yellow flags there, any lifesavers or lifeguards on duty, well, essentially, we just can't see you to save you. And again, we're just imploring people, if you're coming down to the coastline, you're on holidays, make sure you find a spot where you see our lifesavers, because we've seen so many tragic drownings already this summer. As you said, our lifesavers have performed over 1,200 rescues. Importantly, they've conducted so many successful CPRs and resuscitations as well.
As you mentioned, 1,200 rescues in just 7 days. How is your team, how are lifesavers holding up? That must be really demanding on them too.
Look, extremely demanding. I'm here in our State Operations Centre this morning, and again, we're already busy responding to someone reported floating off one of the beaches. And you have to remember that our lifesavers, for the last few months, have actually been spending their times in the floods, and we still have many lifesavers in far western New South Wales helping those communities. So they're coming back from western New South Wales, helping the communities inland, coming straight onto the beaches and saving a multitude of lives. And, you just can't say enough about our volunteer lifesavers and our lifeguards. They are just amazing what they're doing this summer.
We've spoken a bit about those incidents at the beach on the coast. What about inland? Is the message being received there? I know there have been a number of cases, at least in New South Wales, where people have gone missing, or there have been concerns around the safety of people in inland waterways.
Yeah, look, that water safety message just doesn't apply to the coast. As you said, the inland waterways are just as dangerous. Those rivers and lagoons with those hot temperatures, people coming from Sydney out into those country locations, and there's so many challenges swimming out there. And remembering, there are no lifesavers or lifeguards there, so you too take that responsibility and accountability on yourself if and when you swim there. So the message for those people inland, if you do go swimming or if you do see someone in distress in the water, it's so important to ring 000 in the first instance so we can get emergency services responded there straight away.
And of course, that message is coming out loud and clear, and that's what I've been saying, that swim in the patrolled areas only. These Australian waters, beautiful as they are, there are hidden currents, there are rips, there are things that very strong currents that will just straight away suck you right in. So if you are not careful, so you have to be very, very careful. Always take care. I know sometimes, as was mentioned in the report, that people get weary of the crowds and they want to move away from the crowds. But remember, if you move away from the crowds, you're also moving away from the patrolled areas. Well, right now, let's take a look at this COVID situation, and let's take a look at what's happening at the airports. First of all, our CMO, who had advised against testing the travellers, but now we are going to be testing them.
With just hours remaining, these arrivals from Hong Kong are among the last to escape mandatory COVID-19 screening.
I'm glad I come back early.
In China, COVID cases are surging. So, beginning on Thursday, passengers from there and surrounding territories will have to present a negative test result before flying to Australia.
Quite a lot of number of cases there, so it's understandable.
The government's decision to slap new restrictions on certain flights drawing widespread criticism.
A modest measure, simply asking people to be tested before they get on an airline, just like more than a dozen other countries have done.
The controversial move was announced on January 1, just a day after the Chief Medical Officer wrote to the Federal Health Minister advising, "I do not believe that there is sufficient public health rationale to impose any restriction or additional requirements on travellers from China."
We obviously listened to the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, but we've also been influenced by the advice of other health experts such as the World Health Organization.
Why did the government go against the Chief Medical Officer's advice, and what's the plan now they've implemented these restrictions?
Just 2 days before the mandatory screening measures are introduced, there's more detail for passengers on how it'll work. The Health Department advising travellers on the specific tests required and how they'll be policed. Confirmation too that transit travellers and children aged under 12 will be exempt. Andrew Green, ABC News.
So there you go. That's causing a lot of commotion, and I know many people, including me, have put our international travel on hold at this point in time.
When it comes to treating COVID-19, doctors have had a range of options to choose from, but those treatment options are shrinking as the virus mutates. A new study from the Kirby Institute questions the effectiveness of drugs used to help the sickest COVID patients. The drugs, known as monoclonal antibodies, block the virus entry into cells by binding to the spike protein. Mutations to the virus make that more difficult and the drugs less effective.
Some of the new subvariants are less well protected by some of these monoclonal antibodies.
That means the antiviral Paxlovid is now the drug of choice.
Paxlovid still works. We've got to keep a close eye on, emerging variants and emerging resistance for that particular drug.
However, Paxlovid isn't suitable for everyone, as it interacts with many widely prescribed drugs. So with new variants and case numbers rising worldwide, experts say it's crucial Australians take measures to protect themselves.
We need people to get boosted. We need people to get those antivirals quickly.
And stay home if you're feeling unwell. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
And that goes without saying that if you are unwell, do not go out into the public to spread it. Well, right now, let's go to South Australia. Take a look at that floods.
This caravan park at Blanchetown has been underwater for 3 weeks. The slow and steady destructive power of the flood is clear from the air, and the River Murray is still rising.
It's been pretty hectic, just the initial shock of the water coming in, not knowing when it's going to stop.
Owner Adam Powell says the floods have caused at least $100,000 damage to his business. The federal and state governments today committing $126 million towards a new recovery package to try to get those in need back on their feet.
This is the biggest funding package to any disaster in our understanding in the state's history.
Almost half of the funding will go to cleaning up waste, while primary producers can access up to $75,000 each to rebuild fences and levees. Damaged businesses will get up to $50,000 apiece. $10 million will be spent reconnecting thousands of properties to the power grid, and a further $800,000 will go to managing fish kills from Blackwater.
Hopefully it'll kick-start us when the time comes. It just gives you a bit more hope.
There's optimism that the worst has passed for upstream communities. The flow rate at the border has dropped, and Berry and Renmark are seeing the water level fall. But it's a different story downstream.
We may see the height of Lake Alexandrina get up around that 1.3 metres. Above that, we start to have a few concerns around low-lying properties.
This flood emergency is far from over, with authorities particularly concerned about the height of the flood level here in Blanchetown. The rising water has seen locals scramble to protect their properties. Mal McNeil is working to give his levee some extra height at nearby Paisley, but hopes the water stops climbing soon.
Lots of sleepless nights and thinking about, like, you see friends and stuff that, lose everything.
The peak hit Cobdogla today and is set to reach Waikerie by Saturday. Patrick Martin, ABC News, Blanchetown.
So, once again, devastating scenes coming out of there. Well, take a look at, while we're on the floods, let's look at Fitzroy River.
It's just crazy.
This was the scene on the outskirts of Fitzroy Crossing in the morning. Floodwaters lapping at homes, wildlife scrambling for higher ground.
This is an incredibly serious situation. We've recently declared an emergency situation in the Shires of Broome and Derby, West Kimberley.
It's the wet season and the Kimberley is used to torrential rain. But the rain from ex-tropical cyclone Ellie is displacing both people and animals. The Fitzroy River is expected to peak at over 15 metres, smashing the previous record.
An amazing amount of water has fallen from this system, creating these river rises.
The owner of this home, along with many others, was evacuated by boat to safety.
You can hear the water gurgling underneath the house, and when you see your fridge start to float past you, and you can sort of almost reach out and touch it as it floats past you, it sparks the anxiety. And the
poor cows and the animals being trapped in that situation there as well. Well, talking about trapped situation, this escapee managed to escape the prison only to be shot dead.
Police swarm a suburban street on the outskirts of Hobart, where an escaped prisoner was shot dead in the early hours of the morning.
This was a targeted attack between persons known to them.
Nicholas Scott fled police custody at the Royal Hobart Hospital, where he was receiving medical treatment just before 11 o'clock last night. 2.5 hours later, he was found dead outside a property on Black Snake Road in Granton. A 20-year-old man was found inside the home with non-life-threatening head injuries.
Been here 52 years and we haven't known anything like it in the past, not that bad.
2 other occupants, a woman and a teenager, were also home at the time.
Thankfully, neither of those have been injured in relation to that address, but they are regular occupants at that address.
Authorities are investigating how Mr Scott managed to get from the hospital in Hobart CBD to Granton, 20 kilometres away. They're calling on a member of the public who lent their phone to the 26-year-old outside Jack Green in Salamanca to come forward.
We put out an appeal to the public last night with regards to any information on his whereabouts or sightings of him after he had escaped custody.
Police say they have been called to the home in Granton in the past, and both men are known to authorities. There's a large police presence along this suburban street, and while authorities are reassuring the community there's no wider threat, residents are understandably concerned by what's occurred here.
Yeah, a little bit close to home now.
The Tasmania Prison Service says it will carry out a separate investigation into the circumstances of the incident. Liz Gwynn, ABC News.
And as you mentioned, it's a little bit too close to home, and this kind of things are just not helping these kind of situations as well. How did he manage to get that 20 kilometers away? Someone did lend him a phone as well. So there's still unsolved mystery. There's still many parts which have yet to be finalized. Well, Well, the other news that we have is this e-scooters. Are they good or what? Or are they just a big public nuisance? 2 teens have been seriously injured, and I know of many people who have been injured on these things.
Both teenagers sustained serious and traumatic injuries in their collision. It's believed they were riding on the same e-scooter downhill in a suburb in the Sunshine Coast when they collided with a car. They were both airlifted separately to hospital and they remain to be in a serious condition. It comes at the same time as a 48-year-old man in Sydney has also sustained serious injuries overnight when his electric scooter collided with a taxi. It's believed that the e-scooter and the taxi were travelling in the same direction along Bay Street in Brighton Le Sands when the taxi did a U-turn and the scooter and taxi collided. Now it's unclear whether the rider was wearing a helmet, but it is believed to be quite a high-speed crash given the level of damage to the taxi. Emergency services arrived on scene around 1 a.m. and spent quite some time working on the man before he was taken to hospital in a critical condition. There was also a passenger in the taxi who received minor injuries in that collision as well.
And Isabella, this all comes as Melbourne looks to extend an e-scooter trial. How is that going?
Yes, the trial is being extended for another 2 months, so until the end of March. It's been extended so that the government can gather more data on whether or not to legalise both rental and private e-scooters. In Victoria at the moment, private e-scooters are illegal, although lots of people are still riding them. I'm sure many Melburnians will have seen that. How the trial is going is not a straightforward question to answer. Victoria Police have released some data in the past year. They've issued 827 infringement notices and there have been 252 collisions. A lot of those infringements have been for a lack of wearing a helmet or for riding on a footpath. Hospitals and emergency departments also are constantly telling us that they're seeing an increase in presentations with injuries related to e-scooter accidents. But that said, people in Melbourne do love them. They're convenient, they're fun, they're cheap and they're eco-friendly. So I think the jury is still out on whether we'll get to keep them here in Melbourne.
Well, there you go. They are cheap, they are eco-friendly, but, they are dangerous stuff as well. Well, right now, let's take a look at the last story, leading out story for today, as we don't have the real estate update this week, but we will be beginning from next week. So here's the report on house prices.
It's been a very contrasting year for housing market performance. We saw very strong growth in the first 4 months of the year. And then from that peak, property prices have fallen about 8%. So it's definitely on track to be one of the steepest downturns that we've seen on record. And as you say, a pretty big annual drop in terms of a calendar year fall of 5.3%.
And there were big differences across the country. Prices slumped in Melbourne and Sydney, but held up in somewhere like Adelaide and the rest of South Australia. Why was that?
I think it largely comes back to affordability. When you look at Adelaide and regional South Australia, values there are much lower than $1 million market like Sydney. So people are having to extend themselves less with mortgage debt to buy into them, so perhaps not as affected by interest rates. But we've also seen across South Australia really good economic performance through the pandemic off the back of positive interstate migration, rising levels of employment, and the result has been a stronger gross state product outcome than what we would have seen potentially without COVID, according to the ABS. So that's put additional pressure on housing demand as well.
Now, regional prices fell by less. Is that because prices were cheaper there already, and when they rose, they came off a lower base?
I think that has a big part to do with it. Again, it comes back to that affordability piece. So regional Australia had a larger, more extended upswing, and this led to values being higher relative to where they were at the pandemic. But interestingly, the past quarter has seen a pretty sharp fall across combined regional Australia. Values down about 3.2%, so not far off what we're seeing across the combined capitals at 3.3%.
And where do you expect prices overall to go in 2023? We've had some housing analysts predicting a 20% fall.
I think that we could continue to see price falls in the first half of the year, particularly as the cash rate is expected to keep rising, potentially peaking by midway through the year. And then through that, we'll probably get a bit of a trough in the downswing in line with that interest rate trajectory.
Now, many borrowers are facing a mortgage cliff when their fixed term rates expire. How serious could this be?
It's a fair chunk of mortgage holders that could be affected. According to RBA analysis, about 23% of outstanding mortgage debt is on fixed terms that will expire over 2023. So you're talking about some people facing a sticker shock, going from a mortgage rate of 2% or less into an environment where average mortgage rates are about 5 to 6%. So there's a significant sticker shock risk.
And now turning to the rental market, again, vacancies are very, very tight. Rents have soared. What's happening in the rental market?
So the rental market has really more been tied to demographic trends than interest rates. Fewer people per household and the recent return of overseas migration has seen a re-acceleration in annual rent growth, where they're up about 10.2% over the past 12 months. In 2023, we expect Sydney and Melbourne to be the most affected in terms of continually rising rents because they account for the majority of overseas migration. So most people returning or coming to Australia from overseas are initially renters, and that's where we expect that additional pressure to come from.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio, and thank you so much for joining us today, and we will be back tomorrow, as we have seen from the key news is that investigation into the crash of the 2 helicopters in Gold Coast, and of course we're looking at the e-scooters. We've looked at the swimming in waters where there might be reef, and the currents that are there. So always swim between the floods and always swim on the patrolled beaches itself, and don't risk yourself and your family's safety in there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to say goodbye. Until tomorrow, we'll see you then.